Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said she had an excellent conversation with President-elect Donald Trump just last hour. Trump is threatening punishing tariffs on Mexico and Canada unless either country clamps down on drugs and illegal immigration. In a letter to Trump yesterday, Sheinbaum warned of dire consequences for the U.S. economy, saying one tariff will follow another in response and so on until we put our common businesses at risk.
Las drogas sintéticas no las consumimos nosotros.
Sheinbaum read the letter aloud at a press conference, suggesting Mexico could impose its own retaliatory tariffs. Kenneth Smith Ramos is Mexico's former chief negotiator for the modernization of NAFTA. He's now a partner at Aegon, and he joins me now. Hello, sir. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
So as we're speaking, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Canada's premiers are meeting to discuss how to respond to this. How would you describe the response of the Mexican government to this threat of tariffs? How urgently are they taking this?
Well, President Sheinbaum has sent a clear message that Mexico is ready to engage constructively with the United States on trade policy, on preparing the review of the USMCA in 2026, also on key foreign policy elements such as immigration and security. But at the same time, she sent a clear signal that if the United States decides to unilaterally increase tariffs on Mexico, thus violating the USMCA, Mexico will defend itself, as we did in 2018, the same as Canada did in 2018, when the United States increased tariffs on steel and aluminum against Mexico, Canada, and many other countries. This is a way to say that Mexico is willing to work with the United States to find common ground, to advance on these key elements of foreign policy, but that we should keep separate the discussion on trade and what to do regarding how to increase our competitiveness in the region, and on the other side, work on immigration and security in a way that we can have a constructive dialogue and actually make progress on these key issues.
The steel and aluminum tariffs, while really damaging for key parts of the economy, they were small potatoes compared to what he's promising this time around, right? So it seems if he does this in some form and the obvious retaliation begins, it becomes a race to the bottom economically for everybody. I mean, do you think this argument can resonate with Donald Trump? Because it seems so obvious when you look at the math.
Yeah, that's a very important argument. We also have to understand that President-elect Trump is negotiating, 2 months before taking office. And his style is such that he believes that tariffs are a useful tool to negotiate and to pressure trading partners into making concessions, whether it is on actual trade issues, on market access issues, or as we're seeing in the case of Mexico, trying to force the hand of Mexico on immigration, on security, by threatening to essentially cancel, at least temporarily, the advantages that Mexico has in terms of unrestricted access to the U.S. market. But the reality, as you well pointed out, is that those tariffs would, in and of themselves, cause tremendous damage to the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy and its industrial production depends heavily on Mexican inputs that cross the border and that enter factories in the United States and that contribute to the U.S. competitiveness in the automotive sector, aerospace, machinery and equipment, you name it. So by imposing these tariffs, the U.S. is shooting itself in the foot, or would be shooting itself in the foot, because this represents a tax on U.S. consumers and on U.S. competitiveness. And on the other hand, if Mexico is forced to impose retaliation on key, for example, agricultural exports from the United States, where Mexico is the #1 destination of key agricultural products from the Corn Belt of the United States, that will also hurt the U.S. economy severely. So I think Mexico, and hopefully along with Canada, can work to convince President Trump that Mexico and Canada are part of the solution in terms of competing internationally, in terms of becoming a stronger region and facing up to the challenges, for example, of Chinese competition.
It seems, though, that the voices of American industry and American business is going to be very important right now to help Mexico and Canada in this, right? Like, we've seen Walmart warning of price increases if these things go ahead. And when you're a retail giant that big in so many parts of the country, so many sectors, warning that it's going to drive up costs for people, I mean, how important is that sort of internal domestic pressure within the U.S. right now to help Canada and Mexico make this case?
Of course, it's a very strong argument. President-elect Trump ran on a platform where he criticized the Biden administration handling of inflation in the United States. Tariffs would automatically lead to inflation. When we're talking about not having access to competitive Mexican inputs for its industrial production, we can see an increase in the prices of household goods, whether it's refrigerators, washers, obviously automotive goods as well, but also food, which is essential. It's an essential part of food security and an essential part of everybody's, consumption patterns. When you look at Mexico providing all year long the ability to provide to the United States fresh fruits and vegetables, which because of climate conditions the U.S. cannot do, you would have an increase in the price of berries, avocados, tomatoes, the entire supermarket list. So obviously, I don't think that's what the U.S. electorate voted for. It would be painful for the United States, and Mexico and Canada have to make the argument that together we are stronger and that we have benefited tremendously from this trade agreement that, by the way, President Trump and his first administration negotiated with Mexico and with Canada.
So the argument, though, that behind these tariffs is a broader national security concern that has to do with immigration flows and the shipment of fentanyl across borders. And President Sheinbaum said yesterday that Mexico has done a lot to stem the flow of migrants, saying that caravans of migrants no longer reach the border. Do you think Donald Trump buys that? Do you think that's enough for Mexico on that front?
Well, I think President Sheinbaum is doing the right thing, explaining what Mexico is doing. This is the beginning, I believe, of that dialogue, explaining what Mexico is doing to try to stem the flows of immigration, what Mexico is doing in terms of combating organized crime, which is really a cancer on our society, and it's something that needs to be eradicated. The question is, how do we start a constructive dialogue with the U.S., both on immigration and the security, that leads to positive results? It is not by recriminating one another and accusing Mexico of not doing enough on these fronts that we're going to reach a solution. So that's the beginning of a discussion that needs to take place, as President Sheinbaum said, hopefully very soon, between the cabinet members of Mexico meeting with the transition team from President-elect Trump and starting to work out avenues for cooperation and improving the standing that we have in terms of immigration and security issues with the United States.
The fentanyl issue, has become a public health crisis really across the continent, leading to catastrophic drug deaths in all the countries. The flow of that, though, has been something utterly unable to get a handle on. So how can Mexico ease those concerns there? What are the steps President Sheinbaum can take to intercept more of the drug shipments that the president-elect says are going into the United States?
Well, President Sheinbaum is taking measures that are important, and I think these have to be communicated to the United States in terms of creating an intelligence unit to combat organized crime, to increase the ability to identify these networks of criminals in Mexico and how they operate. And vis-a-vis the United States, what Mexico has said, not in this government, but in previous administrations also for many years, is that this is a joint responsibility on the part of Mexico and the United States. Millions and millions of dollars worth of guns come into Mexico and fuel this organized crime that causes tens of thousands of deaths in our country. And the demand in the U.S. is out of control. We have to recognize that the drugs don't just simply cross the border and wind up in every city center of the United States. There's obviously cartels operating in the United States, corruption at the levels of officials as well as in Mexico. So all of this has to be tackled in an organized manner and in a constructive manner, recognizing what each country can do, and perhaps, I think rebuilding the bridges that were somewhat lost under the López Obrador administration with key security agencies in the U.S., such as Homeland Security, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and just working together towards tackling this issue, which is the responsibility of both countries.
It's fascinating in that in his first presidency, it was the reopening and renegotiation and tearing up of NAFTA to create CUSMA, USMCA, whatever you want to call it. And now these tariffs are in a total violation of the agreement that he did. Are you? And these are even higher than what was talked about leading up to the election. I mean, what does this tell you about where trade, where this relationship, where this could go during the second presidency? Because 10 to 20% was what we were all expecting. Now it's 25, and it's linked to things that have nothing to do with trade in and of itself.
Yes, exactly. And the fact that President-elect Trump is talking about imposing tariffs across the board on 25% and then increasing them, I think also we have to look at it as a negotiating position, but at the same time, we know that he comes through on the promises of increasing tariffs. That's why Mexico has to be very clear that this is the wrong way to go, that it would cause tremendous damage to the United States economy, and we have to be very clear about that. So, between now and January 20th, the job of the Mexican cabinet in these meetings that they hope to have with the transition team of President Trump is to defuse this bomb, right? To say clearly what our objectives are, come up with proposals on immigration, on security, separate the discussion from the trade discussion, where we have a lot of good news and a lot of work to be done between now and the review in 2026. So I think it's a negotiating position by Trump, but we do have to take it seriously, and there's a possibility that he could actually decide to shoot himself in the foot, thinking that the United States can withstand the pain of retaliation longer than Mexico or Canada can. Yeah. At the same time, it's the work of Mexico and Canada to say that in reality, fighting amongst ourselves in North America, the only thing it does, it strengthens other competitors. I can imagine the Chinese government looking at this infighting in North America and really laughing at it and saying, well, they're not going to be as competitive as we feared that they were going to be if they unite. So these are key messages that Mexico has to bring to the table and try to diffuse the situation.
Okay, but on the infighting within North America, Doug Ford, who's the Premier of Ontario, Canada's largest province, Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, the energy superpower in this country, they all said they're willing to drop Mexico from the trade agreement if that's what it takes to appease Donald Trump and just move to a bilateral agreement. I mean, how worried are you about the survivability of a deal you worked on so hard, personally, that it could survive the current state of politics on the continent?
Yeah, the politics are difficult. I don't think we're facing the end of the USMCA. Even if the countries don't agree in 2026 in the review, there's a mechanism where you do yearly reviews. And right now, let's remember that the agreement is in place until 2036. The review, what it does is relaunch it for another 16 years, right? So we're not facing the end of the USMCA. Obviously, the threat of tariffs is problematic. It could severely damage the economy of all three countries. And going back to your comment on the premiers from Alberta and Ontario, I think it's the wrong approach. It's the wrong approach because Mexico and Canada have a vibrant trade relationship, more than $40 billion in trade. Canada is the number 3 investor in Mexico in sectors such as mining, manufacturing, many areas where there's a lot of potential to continue to grow the relationship. And I think that it is precisely the competitiveness of North America that is enhanced by having the 3 countries work together. And I think the immediate lesson that we learned 2 days ago is that trying to cuddle up with Trump by trying to pick a fight with Mexico will just backfire. I mean, it's not as if Trump left Canada off the hook. They put Canada and Mexico in the same basket with the same threat. So that's just not going to work. And we should do what we did in 2018 between Mexico and Canada, which is find common ground, find common positions, and put them in front of the Trump administration and try to work together. We will not always see eye to eye on negotiating items, but to the degree that we can find common points of view and present them jointly, we can have success.
So I've had, just as a final question, sir, I've had a lot of deja vu remembering the first Trump presidency. You were at the negotiating table during the NAFTA revitalization, let's call it. What's it like to be in the middle of intense and detailed negotiations like that when you know a single social media post can just blow the whole thing sideways? How do you make progress in that?
No, the key word that you said is intense, without a doubt. And one strategy that the Mexican government tried to pursue when we negotiated the agreement originally, the USMCA, was to try to the maximum degree possible to ignore the political noise. While we were going to Canada or the US, every time there was a round of negotiations, Trump would come out with a tweet and say, here's President Peña Nieto coming to pay for the wall. And the Mexican media would jump and say, this is insulting and unacceptable. We should walk away from the negotiations. negotiation. But that would have been a big mistake. That would have played into the hand of what President Trump was trying to do, to create a crisis and to blame Mexico for walking away from the negotiation. So my recommendation now is to understand that we will face turbulence. It will be very hard in terms of dealing with these social media attacks and press conferences by the Trump administration, but we have to concentrate on the final objective, which is getting a deal done. In other words, doing the review in 2026, having a successful outcome of that, and working on separate tracks on all the different and complex elements of foreign policy between Mexico and the United States. But we are going to have a severe storm and have to be ready for it.
No, you made a very good point there, and it reminds me of the Canadian government saying you have to respond to Donald Trump's actions, not his words. Because if you respond to the words, you're just going to be driving yourself crazy, chasing everything. Kenneth Smith Ramos, Mexico's chief negotiator for the modernization of NAFTA. We appreciate your time, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure.